How do you know? How do you know it's true? It is in the Bible. And why do we trust the Bible? It's God's Word. That's 100% true. But the thing about it is that God is way smarter than us. And God also gave us other ways to look at things as to whether or not they're true or false. We call it evidence. And so, for example, if I were to tell you that this is a bottle of water, do you believe me? Yes. Why? Because we trust you. You can trust me, but what if I put like some electrolyte water or something in there? It's not water then. It's something different. You're trusting me because you've got some evidence. You said, that looks like a water bottle, looks like water in it. What if I say, I declare that this is grape knee-high?
No. Then you're lying.
You were just trusting me a minute ago. What happened?
You lied.
I mean, it's not purple.
That hurts. That's exactly right, though. What you did was you guys have stumbled onto something that is absolutely true, and that is that when something is true, that you can look at it from different angles, different lines of evidence, and it's still true. But if something is false, what we find out is that it just takes one thing for you to know that it's not correct. And so, as creationists, or as someone who believes the Bible in creation, we believe that the world is about 6,000 years old. But science, the world in general, wants to tell us that through the Big Bang and evolution, that the Earth is billions of years old, that dinosaurs were here millions of years ago. Mankind eventually sprouted up out of a puddle of ooze someplace by way of some other stuff as it went. And so we have a fundamental disagreement in time frames. We have 6,000 years versus millions and billions of years. And so what I want to do this morning is I want to address lines of evidence that will either help confirm or help deny the theses. And if you'd be willing to help pass things. How many of you guys thought this was actually going to be a prophecy today? Yeah, I don't blame you. Huh. There we go. So the first thing, and by the way, I'm passing these around. You guys are welcome to look at them. I'm not going anywhere right after if you want to read. Some of these are actually articles that are somewhat lengthy. But I've got the geologic column as the first thing that's on here. And the thing about the geologic column is that it's in pretty much every textbook if you get into geology or whatever. And it says that there are these many, many layers that occurred. They were put down over millions of years. And we find dead critters in many of these layers, and that these dead critters, they had that particular time frame in which they lived. And so what you find in lots of places, by the way, there are almost no places on Earth where all of these layers actually exist. You will find out if you go looking that many of the layers are missing depending on which spot you step on. But in general, there's a nasty sort of an agreement that goes on. The people on the rock side tend to ask the people on the fossil side how old the fossils are to determine how old the rock is, because they weren't there. And the people on the fossil side tend to ask the rock people how old the rock is so they can date the fossils. Well, when two people decide to agree on how old something is without any other evidence, that might lead to a problem. So I wanted to throw that out there. That's basically how those layers are set up. But you might say to yourself, well, Jerry, but you're just talking. You're spouting grape knee-high. And so we have to start talking about the layers. How many of you are old enough to remember Mount St. Helens blowing up? I remember it. I was old enough. Mount St. Helens was a volcano. It blew up in the 80s. And what you're looking at, and when they pass this around, you'll see it. They're up front here, guys. You're going to see this picture. There's about 400 feet thick of material here. It was put down over the course of just 2 years. And when you look at it, you're going to see layers. There are many layers here. And so what I'd like to put forth is the first piece of evidence suggesting that we do not need millions of years to lay down a lot of material very, very quickly, and that those layers are stratified, that they form different independent layers of their own that look and smell and hopefully not taste different. So I have an argument here that says even if the evolutionists are right that it takes millions of years to put down those layers, there is direct evidence that we all, well, those of us who are alive, could see that we can form layers very, very quickly. The next picture is this one, and a lot of you are a long ways away. But we've got all of these layers of rock here. Does anybody know what these sort of vertical pieces are?
Trees.
They're trees. These trees have a special name. They're polystrate trees. And the thing that's weird about them is that if all of these layers of rock took millions of years, how did that tree stay there? Has anybody ever seen a dead tree? What do? Decay. They decay. They tend to fall over and they decay. Do you see anything else that's kind of weird about these trees?
The rocks.
They're in the rocks.
Well, yeah, that is weird. But what I'm specifically getting at, there's no branches and there's no roots. They're all gone. No branches and no roots. If this tree was simply in that patch of dirt and then these layers formed over time, why are there no roots? There ought to at least be roots, you would think, even if the branches kind of went away. Well, turns out that Mount St. Helens is actually useful to us. When that mountain blew up, a lot of things happened. There was a lot of heat, and it melted a bunch of water, and that water was ice and snow that was on top of that mountain. And it was an explosion, guys. It's flat out an explosion. What it did, all of that forest on that mountainside was ripped off of its stumps. The branches, as the tree was thrown down the hillside, all of the branches were ripped off. And down at the bottom of that mountain, there's a lake that formed. And that lake is now home to many, many thousands of these logs. And these logs, over time, have become somewhat waterlogged. There's not much roots left on them. There's not much in the way of branches. And what they're doing is they're beginning, instead of floating completely, they'll tip down. And they will go, and they eventually go and they sit on the bottom. And, oh, I'm behind. Why didn't you guys tell me?
Yeah.
So, this is what that lake looks like right now. These logs are all in that lake, and they are tipping up on their own. Some of them are beginning to sink and rest in that sediment. And who knows what happens to a lake when there's an entire mountainside above it and it rains. It fills up. We get dirt and stuff that comes down, fills up, and it's slowly burying these things. Not over the course of millions of years, not billions of years, but over just the course of a few tens of years. That was me. So, since we're in the notion of talking about all of these layers, I just want to throw in a sneaky little thing. Wow, I'm glad I have handouts. Back in about 1948, there was a guy who was working at a power plant. And it was a coal-burning power plant. And so they were shipping in coal from out west. And the thing about coal-fired plants is that you just don't dump coal into them. You pulverize the coal. You get it into a fine powder because it's very efficient. As it goes into the furnace, it burns very rapidly, it's efficient, burns much cleaner. And he had a big chunk of coal. And so he took a big hammer and he whacked it because he was going to break that coal up. And when he whacked it, out come this little iron pot. Well, what's it doing in the middle of a coal thing, a coal seam, a big thing of coal that's supposedly millions of years old? It doesn't belong there. This is just one example. It's not the only example. You'll find that there are other things that have been found in seams of coal, like statues. I read once about a bell that was found in one of these things. There are items inside of this coal. This was clearly human-made. Does anybody think that this formed over millions of years by evolution? No. It most assuredly did not. So, somehow or another, this got buried in a deep seam of coal, and it was there, not for millions of years, but for something less. Now, I'd also like to sort of hit the big thing in the room. And that is, what's the one thing that everybody talks about when we're talking about how old the earth is, that we wonder, did humans exist beside them? It's dinosaurs, right? It's a big topic. And so, another article here, this is a full-blown article about the discovery of what's called a mummified dinosaur. This guy was found up in Canada in a coal seam, and almost perfect condition. His scales and armor were intact. His guts were still inside of him. His skin was perfectly preserved. A little bit rocky now, but other than that, this guy was in fantastic shape. Now, if I were to just say the name Noah, and then I was going to say that they said that this guy was found under special conditions, what might you think they think happened to this guy? He got buried in a flood. They think he got buried in a flood very, very quickly. And so I brought dinosaurs into the mix, and now time to talk about dinosaurs some more. Because what do we see when we see dinosaurs these days? We get their fossils, right? We get their bones. So I have a question for you. Those, according to evolutionists and those people, they say that the last dinosaur died about 65 million years ago. That means every fossil has to be a minimum of 65 million years old. My question for you guys, and I'll take any answer you got, just shout it out. How long does it take to make a fossil?
Thousands of years.
Thousands of years. You don't get to say. It turns out, in this article from Nature magazine, these folks are not friendly to creationists, they are evolutionists. It takes us, as modern humans, exactly 1 day to make a fossil. And the first time they tried it, we're pretty good at making diamonds, artificial diamonds. And if you don't know how that works, it's basically heat and pressure. You apply some heat, a little pressure, and you take that carbon and all of a sudden you got diamonds. And they said, we're going to try that with fossils. You know what happened? It failed miserably. Absolutely failed, because what they found out was that they had a stinking, gooey, nasty, liquidy mess when they got done with it, because there's all that stuff. And does anybody have a guess how they fixed the problem? They buried it in dirt. They took the fossil, they buried it in sediment, and then they applied heat and pressure, and they made perfect fossils in a day. So good that the electron microscope couldn't tell the difference. These were classic grade A fossils made in exactly 1 day. So now, I hope you guys, I'm doing this terribly. I hope you guys can see that I'm beginning to stack some evidence that suggests that all of the things that are taking, according to evolutionists, millions of years to happen, don't take millions of years. I'm trying to stack evidence that suggests that the Earth is young and that they're wrong because these things don't take as long. Well, that's not the end of the story, though. Turns out that in 2005, there was a lady by the name of Dr. Mary Schweitzer. Her job is to dig up dinosaur bones. That was her calling in life. That's what she loves doing. And she was out digging out a bunch of these things, and she broke one. And can anybody guess what she found when she broke that dinosaur bone?
Live flesh.
Gooey stuff. She found gooey stuff. You're not supposed to find gooey stuff and stuff that's millions of years old. All the gooey stuff is supposed to be long gone. And she got picked on. She was not a creationist. She was actually an evolutionist. And they picked on her, saying that she tainted her sample with a dead bird, that she was making things up. And eventually, they decided that they would start looking at some other bones, cracking them open, seeing what, and they found gooey stuff everywhere. They were finding gooey stuff that didn't belong because anything that's millions of years old shouldn't be gooey anymore. And even if we're being the most generous, things like collagen, which is fairly tough, those kinds of molecules, organic molecules, the scientists said at best could last 1 million years. That's under perfect situation. Well, if the last dinosaur died 65 million years ago, we can't be finding this stuff inside of these bones. It just can't happen. You can't have that. So, once again, and this is a long article, and then it goes into some of the details on how people picked on this woman for doing good science. But by all means, once again, I think I've stacked another argument saying that these things probably aren't 65 million years old. So at least that part of the theory is wrong. And so I want to move forward. Since can't stop now. And I want to talk about something that nerds love, and that is radioactive stuff. Carbon-14 in this case. So the deal with radioactive substances, radioactive elements like carbon-14, is that they decay. They're unstable. And in the case of carbon-14, it gives off a neutron and becomes nitrogen-14. Now, carbon-14 is what we breathe in. Carbon-14 is naturally occurring. It's in the environment. Somebody just breathed in one right now, and we didn't even know it, because it's all around us. But there's something very special about carbon-14, and that is that once we die and we stop breathing, we don't bring it in anymore. We stop taking it into our bodies. And so, because it's unstable and it decays, it goes through this decay process and it transforms into something else. So the idea is that if we know how much carbon-14 it had in it when it died, and we know how much is there now, we should be able to figure out how old it is. It turns out that the half-life, or the time that it takes half of it to decay to something else, is about 5,700 years. Pretty long time, but really pretty short if we're talking about millions and billions of years. And so, if we've got all of this carbon-14 that's out there in all of these living things, we would expect to not find any in dinosaur bones if they're millions of years old. And here's why. If all of the Earth, the entire Earth, us, the oceans, all of the rock, if all of it was made 100% out of carbon-14 because of the decay, because you guys, have you ever taken a piece of paper and cut it in half, and then cut it in half again, and cut it in half again? How long before you can't cut anything anymore? It doesn't take very long. After about 8 or 9 of the times cutting it in half, you're down to something that's really, really hard to work with. there's hardly nothing left. And so we would expect that in a dinosaur bone that's at least 65 million years old, we should not find any carbon-14 at all. Should be nothing. Zero, none, zip. Because once something gets beyond what we would expect in something that's 50,000 years old, we have a hard time counting it. And beyond 100,000 years old, we can't even detect any existing carbon-14 that's left. It's just too small an amount. Guess what they find in dinosaur bones everywhere? Who'd have thunk, huh? Carbon-14, something that shouldn't be there. And it shouldn't have been there, in their case, for a minimum of like 64 million years. Shouldn't have been any. They should not find it at all. And they find a lot of it. It's abundant inside these samples. So you might say to yourself, we've been looking at all these layers of rocks and all of these fossils. What about the other stuff? Because there's other stuff that was once alive in the ground. And it turns out that when we look at diamonds, because they're made of carbon, right? Carbon in a special lattice structure, that carbon has carbon-14 in it. Diamonds are supposed to be between 1 and 3 million years old. There is no way that there could have been any carbon-14 left in it if they're truly that old. Petroleum, oil, also has a source component that was once a living organism. It's got carbon-14 in it. It can't be millions of years old. At best, it can just be thousands of years old. Coral was once a living organism. It breathed, brought in materials to itself. It's got carbon-14 in it. And we find this over and over and over again in all of these things that were once living, stuff that's supposed to be in ancient antiquity, but it's still got carbon-14 in it. So what I have tried to do today is lay out a very narrow line of evidence. And the evidence that I was trying to lay out was that, remember I talked about there's the truth and that the evidence always supports the truth? And if something is wrong or false, that it just takes one thing to kind of make it look like it's not really true. All of these lines of evidence are just very narrow that suggest, the evidence suggests that the things that we've been told are millions and billions of years old simply cannot be so. They cannot be that old. I did not prove Genesis 1, but I did not contradict it. All of the evidence suggests that the earth is much, much younger than what science has told us that it is. I didn't get into a lot of other stuff. This was narrow. We've got limited time. I mean, are you guys up for another 4 or 5 hours? Yes. So I'm just going to quickly go over some things that I didn't even touch on. And I won't get into a lot of detail. But for example, have any of you ever taken a walk into the ocean? What was it like? Did you fall?
No.
Why not?
Because it's pushing you back.
Well,
I mean, it's like, you can't go there.
there was a bottom though, right?
Yeah.
You could stand on it. If the earth is billions of years old, then the seafloors should have a lot more sediment than they have on the bottom of them. There's hardly any sediment at all, to be honest with you. It's much more in line with the earth just being a few thousands of years old than it would be for millions and billions of years. It's just simply, there's not enough there. Another argument that the earth is young, evidence that supports the idea of the earth being young. Bent rock layers. How many of you guys, I really like, it's pretty when you take a look and there's like things like the Grand Canyon and you see all of these layers that are stacked up. But some of these are bent, right? They go whoop, whoop, like that. And how many of you have ever successfully bent a rock? Well, those rock layers they're not cracked. They're solid rock. They're beautiful, pristine. Nothing's ever happened to them. If those layers had been put down layer by layer, and then something pushed that up, that rock should be broken. It should be cracked. But it's not. It's pristine. It's beautiful. It's unblemished. And so that suggests that those layers were put down one at a time, and they were still soft when that moved or heaved. Well, if each one of those layers takes millions of years, that doesn't make any sense. That can't work that way. Another line of evidence that suggests that the Earth is young, or at least that those rocks were. The faint sun paradox. This one's a little bit interesting. The sun is a big ball of fire in the sky. And the deal with it is that it takes hydrogen, fuses it together, makes helium, and then gives off just a ton of energy. A lot of heat, a lot of light, a lot of radiation that goes out into space. That's what powers our Earth. That literally is the driving force that runs everything. But there's something that's special. If the Earth is only a few thousands of years old, no problemo. However, if the Earth is 4 billion years old, billions of years old anyway, that means the sun is too. And if the sun is that old, the chemistry of the sun would have to have changed over time. Initially, 4 billion years ago, the sun would have had to have much more hydrogen and much less helium because it hadn't had the time to make it yet. And if that were the case, then the sun back 4 billion years ago would have been on Earth, what we would see on Earth. The Earth would be about 25 degrees cooler. Now, for those of you who are old enough to remember global cooling in the next ice age from the 70s and the 80s, remember that they were talking that all it would take was for the Earth to drop in degrees by 1 or 2 degrees, and we got the next ice age. It's popsicles for everybody. Break out your snow cones because everything is going to be cold. 25 degrees colder is an absolute detriment to all life on this planet. It would wipe us out. So how they think that life could form under those conditions doesn't make sense. The next item is the rapidly decaying magnetic fields. For those of you who don't know it, the magnetic shield around our Earth is decaying very quickly. And if it's always been decaying since time began, that's a problem. That means it was so strong at one point that life also couldn't have formed because the magnetic field around the planet would have been crazy, crazy high. And nothing can form under that. By the way, I don't know if you know it or not, but all of our nervous systems, they're electrical. Everything about us, we're not really robots or anything, but we are heavily electrically driven. And that's the thing that's keeping my heart and all of your hearts beating. That's the thing that keeps our little neurons snipping so that we can think about things. So by all means, it's another line of evidence that suggests that the Earth is young and not old. Who loves helium? Whenever you got a birthday, you get a balloon, right? It always floats full of helium. Well, it turns out that helium is one of the byproducts of decay of some radioactive rocks. And the thing about helium is that it does in rock exactly what it does in your balloon. It tends to go up. And the thing is, rock is a lot more solid than the air around us, so it goes up slower. But as these radioactive elements decay inside this rock over 4 billion years or something like that time scale, we would expect not to find very much helium in that at all. Should be almost none. But that's not what we find. We find those rocks absolutely chock full of helium that doesn't belong there, shouldn't be there. It should have already worked its way out. And so that's another line of evidence that suggests that the Earth is young. Comets. Everybody oohs and ahs over comets. They come around. Sometimes we predict the end of the world every time one comes around. What makes a comet special? Does anybody know?
It comes into our atmosphere, it burns up and leaves a trail.
The tail, exactly right. Anybody know what that tail is made out of?
Ice and water.
Ice, some dirt too, a lot of ice though. And so every time that comet comes around and that tail is out there, that comet is losing mass. That tail is made up of stuff that no longer is with that comet. And so comets are another line of reasoning that suggests that the universe itself, or at least the solar system, is quite young, because these things have a limited lifetime. They can only go so many times before they lose so much weight that they don't exist anymore. Anybody here that has been in the ocean, did you drink the water?
Yeah.
You drank it? Wow. Not on purpose. Okay, you got some in your mouth then. The reason why is that it's salty, right? How does it get salty? So the rain falls on the land. It washes minerals out of the dirt and the soil and the rocks, heads downhill, eventually makes it to the ocean, and then the sun evaporates the water out of the ocean and does it all over again. Over time, the salinity or the saltiness of the ocean increases. Naturally. If the Earth is 4 billion years old, the oceans should be much saltier than even the Dead Sea, which is the saltiest place, the saltiest body of water on the Earth. And I mean it, it's really salty. Those crystals just pop out of nowhere. They're all over the shores. So it's another line of argument, another line of reasoning that the Earth cannot be that old. Otherwise, the oceans would be absolutely crusty with salt. And finally, the last one, and then I'll spare you, is how many of you love hearing news about the stuff that they dig up in Antarctica? That they're down there drilling the ice, and they bring up some ancient bacteria. It's millions of years old. I don't know why, but everything is millions of years old. And they bring this bacteria up. Well, there's a problem. DNA can't last millions of years. Even if it's frozen, it breaks down. It doesn't last like that. And so that bacteria simply cannot be millions of years old. Thousands, yeah, thousands, but not millions. And so I'm going to end with that, and I'm just going to say that I hope I have thrown some things at you, lines of evidence that you can follow, that you can think about, that suggest that the Earth, or at least is evidence that supports the idea that the Earth is quite young. And at the very least, it puts some things maybe in your mind that maybe the theories of evolution, the Big Bang Theory, got some splaining to do, because they're not quite right. Things can't be quite as they say. Otherwise, we would have some better answers to some of these questions. I will hang around. Okay, Tony, I'll take a question.
I love science. I was thinking, if they were saying it was like over millions of years old, if it was underground that much, the dirt would overtake it and like the dirt, because they're called twin plates in the ground. That's how earthquakes are started.
That's another line of evidence that you can follow.
Always moving.
Yep.
Do they place it there and say they find it, or?
No. Tectonic movements are another problem with, I don't want to get into the weeds, but it's the idea of uniformitarianism. And uniformitarianism says that because or when we measure things as moving very slowly, like tectonic plates move slowly for us, a few inches, maybe a year, something like that, that they've always moved like that. Our modern science doesn't like the idea of catastrophes or catastrophism, which is actually the whole story of the flood. Modern science doesn't like that one little bit. And so as a creationist, we would generally say we are open to evidence that suggests that things do happen under a catastrophe, just like those polystrate logs show that there was a catastrophe that took those trees and swept them up someplace, just like we would say that that beautiful dinosaur somehow got buried really, really quickly. We would use that and we would say, we think uniformitarianism is wrong, that there is a great deal of evidence right down to the geologic column that suggests that there has been a massive worldwide flood and that these things happened exactly as the Bible said that they happened. And we would invite our friends who don't believe that to say, please explain these things in terms of whether it be the carbon-14 dating, the age of the gooey stuff in the dinosaur bones. We would ask them to explain that rather than what they mostly do right now, and that's to simply accuse us of taking bad samples, which is mostly what they do. Go ahead, Sierra.
Okay, so we have fresh bodies of water and salt water. Okay, so then how does the fresh water stay fresh?
Okay.
If the sun is still...
So, fresh bodies of water, let's start with the Mississippi. So that fresh body of water starts from a little ground spring up in Minnesota, someplace up by Minneapolis, St. Paul, and it runs downhill. And so the water comes out of the earth, and it does pick up some minerals and things as it goes, right? It has to. It's in dirt, right? And there's stuff that's washing downhill. But it only has a certain amount of time because it's moving, right? It's moving downhill, and it gets to the ocean. The ocean is the last stop. That water doesn't have enough time to pick that up because it's moving. But in the ocean, it stops. It dumps off its payload, and it gets evaporated. So it's a matter of time. It simply doesn't have enough time to pick it up, is where I'm going with this. I hope that helps. Yes?
Other evidence is when they went to the moon, they had all this big pads and everything for the landing because they expected the dust on the moon to be extremely deep, like feet deep.
Yep.
And they were stunned to find out it was only like an inch or so. So that's another thing that, given the time,
Yep. Because the moon doesn't have an atmosphere, right? It doesn't have a place for all of this stuff. It should have just settled there if there was going to be a bunch of dust, and it should have been many, many feet deep. And it's simply not what we find. And you bring up a good point, because I hit on just a few areas, but I'm aware of there's something like 300 different lines of evidence that suggest a young Earth. And there are only a few, like I think the number is 6, that give a result that would suggest an old Earth. And so I'm going to go with the vast preponderance, and I'm going to say that the evidence supports a young Earth. And we work on trying to solve why the other 6 suggest an old Earth rather than try to say why the 300 are wrong. No other questions? I will keep this stuff around and I'll hang around if you want to read some of these articles. The one about the lady that found the dinosaur with the gooey stuff in it, I thought was fascinating. By all means, take your time and read it. Read it.
did that lady that was criticized and so on, did that change her perspective of evolution and versus creation?
I do not believe it did. Everything that I could find on her suggests that she stuck with an evolutionary viewpoint. If you read the article, what you'll find is that the establishment science somehow came up with a theory after they couldn't accuse her of taking bad samples and they had to deal with the evidence. Then they came up with an iron mechanism for somehow that the iron infiltrated the gooey parts and that made the gooey parts last longer. But when you read it, you'll find that they had to do some really strange things. Like they had to rupture, because they started with a live animal, or at least a freshly dead one, and they had to rupture all of its red blood cells at once to release iron, and it still wasn't enough. It still didn't do it. And so what you'll find is a general agreement in the evolutionist camp to do everything that they can to discount from and to take away from and try and tear down the other idea rather than deal with the evidence as it exists. They could fund their own research to take a look at it. They could modify their theory to take into account the data. They do it all the time. The Big Bang Theory was first made in the 50s, and it's been revised about 80,000 times as they find new evidence. It's not hard to do. We don't know how God did it. Even though we believe in a young earth, it sure would be cool to know how. We look at this stuff and we wonder in amazement, how did he do it? It doesn't mean that we stop trying to figure it out. It's awesome to figure out how his mind might have worked and how he did all of this. We just have, but we're limited, and there's only so much we can do with what we've got. And so, yeah.
DNA was not known when Darwin came up with his theory.
True. Yep.
I've read these things that we go to last week, and I read them all. And one of the things that I loved was there was a master physicist, I think it was a doctor, that said to think that a DNA molecule is formed. Can you read that? Do you remember?
Yeah. So, what she's referring to, there's an astrophysicist. His name is Fred Hoyle, and it turns out he's a pretty good mathematician. And he said he compared the probability of DNA forming spontaneously to the chance that a tornado sweeping through a junkyard might assemble a Boeing 747. So the odds of DNA happening by accident are about the same odds as a tornado going through a junkyard and building a fully functioning jumbo jet airplane. I don't know how that would happen. It's a physical impossibility. There's other math that really makes things incredible. You could go down, there's information theory, and the idea of how information creates. We tend to use different arguments, but it's sort of simple, sort of along the lines of, if I put enough zeros and ones together, and I do it often enough, that by the time I'm done, I'll have a working version of Windows. And humans can't even do that. So it's just, when you get down and you look at the evidence, there are some real hurdles that evolution has to overcome to validate their viewpoint. And it makes more sense that the earth is young. Just plain and simple. So other than that, I can't think of anything except maybe I should wrap up with a prayer. Huh? Heavenly Father, thank you for the evidence that you have given us, that you have laid in the deep layers of the earth, that you put all around us, so that we can try and understand the world around us, how things work, how things are. But more importantly, give us the wisdom, give us the knowledge and intelligence to sort through this evidence and apply it to our lives, apply it to our situation, so that we can better come to the conclusion that everything is exactly the way that you said it was. You put it together, you told us the story, and now it's just up to us to believe it. And we thank you for putting these things in our path and the minds to do it. And so thank you, and we ask for your help going forward to apply this knowledge correctly. In Jesus' name, amen. Yep. Oh, yeah. Thanks. All right, ready for a sermon? Just a minute. No big deal. No, I just wanted to make the comment that when you see some of this evidence that there's soft dinosaur tissue, all of these different things, you would think that it would be like front page news, that it would be on the headline saying, hey, we're going to have to rethink a lot of things, because if this proves that there's no possible way the earth, the universe can be as old as what we say, then you realize the whole theory of evolution falls apart. They have to have millions of years. And so that's why you're not going to hear about that. Is Romans 1:18 says, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against ungodliness of all unrighteousness of men who hold the truth, suppress the truth in unrighteousness. There's people that do not want the truth to go out. And that's why you're not hearing about these things on front page news. It would totally devastate worldviews. Yeah, Carol.
If you believe in evolution, you have to believe that evolution is an awesome designer.
Yeah.
Because everything is designed. It's not randomly made. This was made and that was made.
Yeah.
If you believe that Genesis 1, then you believe the Bible because God wrote it. If you don't believe in Genesis 1:1, then you don't believe.
Yeah, it's one of those things that everything is turned upside down. Death is a curse. That was a result of sin coming into the world. But according to evolution, death is a blessing because it brings better life into the world. So it's very oppositional to the truth. You remember the parable of the seed and the sower, and I've talked about that many times. The hard ground, the waste, the pathway, it's been trotted over and over and over again to when the seed hits it, it doesn't penetrate. Well, people have heard over and over, millions of years ago, millions of years. It's in kids' books. I can't watch a nature show that they don't refer to millions of years ago. It's throughout that. And the evolution being thrown into everything as it's a fact, not a theory, is throughout. And so when people that don't grow up in a church, they don't hear the Word of God, they don't read the Bible, and that's what they've been told since they were little kids, they just assume that that's real, the reality of things. And then when believers come and talk about, well, no, God created the world. Well, how did he do it? Well, he spoke it into existence. They go, well, that sounds crazy, because of the foundation that's been laid and been talked about over and over again, and things like that. So it's a very important issue, and we're very thankful we had an opportunity to teach some kids. In fact, the whole camp was focused on creation. So it was over 130 kids hearing these things. So it was a great time. Well, I just wanted to talk about that a little bit. And then if you want to stand with us, we can sing our closing hymn. Yeah. It's right up in the top right corner. It'll say end.